turn to Proverbs 6:25. I'm going to cover another 2 verses tonight, Lord willing. Proverbs 6:25. It says, "Lust not after her beauty in thine heart, neither let her take thee with her eyelids." So let's look at the first phrase there, "Lust not after her beauty in thine heart." And this is where sin begins. It begins in the heart with lust. And the heart is kind of like the organ of lust. And I'll talk about that in a second. But if you look at James chapter 1, verses 14 and 15, this, of course, we're primarily talking about lusting after the strange woman, but all types of lust begin in the heart and end in sin if they are not stopped. James chapter 1, 14 through 15 says, "But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lust and enticed. Then when lust hath conceived, it bringeth forth sin, and sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth death." So it begins with a temptation, and then the lust towards whatever that temptation is, and then the lust conceives and it brings forth sin. So the lust in itself is not necessarily sinful, because lust is a desire. So you could have a desire for something, but if the desire becomes uncontrollable, then it's sin. Or if the desire is for something sinful in and of itself, then of course it's sin as well. But just the desire is not necessarily sinful, because like Paul says that I covet your prayers, and covet and lust are the same thing essentially. Paul said he would not know in lust, except the law had said, "Thou shalt not covet." And so when Paul said he coveted their prayers, he's lusting after their prayers, desiring their prayers, but he's not obviously sinning doing it. And like I said, the heart is basically the organ of lust, spiritually speaking. In Psalm 81 and verse 12, I think Paul also told the Corinthians to covet the best gifts, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, it's one of those things that's not always sinful. It just depends on the context. Psalm 81 and verse 12, the Lord says, because Israel would not hearken unto him, he says, "So I gave them up unto their own heart's lust." The hearts there has an apostrophe. So the lust is the possession of the heart. "And they walked in their own counsels." And this is, as we've talked about in Proverbs chapter 1 in different places, that this is one of the Lord's signature judgments, is that he judges us by giving us whatever that is that we desire, if that thing is contrary to him. So sometimes God doesn't have to do anything to punish us except just back off and say, "Okay, go ahead and do whatever you want," and then you'll suffer your consequences. Also in Romans chapter 1 and verse 24, it can be a good technique also with discipline, whether it's a child or an employee or somebody, that they're just itching to do something. You keep telling them, "No, that's not a good idea, don't do that." You finally just say, "Okay, go ahead." And they're like, "Oh man, that hurts when I pounded my finger with a hammer." "Yeah, well, I told you not to do that." So sometimes that can be a good teacher. Romans 1 and verse 24. "Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves." And this is basically talking about what Solomon's talking about here. He hasn't gotten into sodomy yet there, and Paul hasn't in verse 24. Later on he does, but right there he's talking about fornication. He gave them up to their own heart's lust, or the lust of their own hearts. So all sin begins in the heart, and then it comes out through the members. To lust is, and I'm going to skip the first 3 definitions because they are all prior to 1611. To lust means to have a strong, excessive, or inordinate desire, and then it is used with for, or after, or unto, and that's exactly how it's used here. "Lust not after her beauty in thine heart." So this is the definition to be used. It can specifically refer to sexual desire, and that's probably how we think of it most of the time when you hear about somebody lusting after something. It's usually not apples or bananas or something. It's typically it's sexual in nature. Although if you've just got done fasting for a day or something, You could lust after an apple or a banana, right? That looks really good. It says, lust not after her beauty in thine heart. I always like reading definitions of words like this, because this would be a word if you said, define for me what beauty is. And it's one of those things where I can identify it and I can point you to it and I can give you an example of it. But if you said, describe for me what is beauty, I'd be like, something that looks good. It's really hard to do. And I just think this definition is spot on. Beauty is such combined perfection of form and charm of coloring as affords keen pleasure to the sense of sight. And then it gives, part A is the first specific instance of this. It says, in the human face or figure. And that's more times than not, when we refer to something beautiful, we're usually referring to a person, normally a woman. They're usually better looking than men, right? But that's typical. Sometimes an animal is beautiful or a tree is beautiful or something, but a lot of times it's referring to humankind. And I just thought that was interesting as I thought about it. The combined perfection of form and charm of coloring. And if you thought about it, why is one person's face beautiful and another person's face isn't as beautiful? Well, it's because it doesn't have the same form and the same coloring, because that's pretty much what it comes down to. But it is such a subjective thing, because why is one woman just beautiful and another woman just looks okay? And I mean, they all have a nose and ears and mouth. I mean, it's just slight differences in form, and it's really interesting and perplexing to me why certain things are beautiful to certain people and certain things aren't, and when they're really very similar. I don't know, it's just something to think about anyway. I thought the definition was pretty neat. So it's not only a sin to physically commit adultery with a woman, it's also a sin to do so in your heart. And that's what Solomon's getting at here. Lust not after her beauty in thine heart. Let's look at it just 3 verses here. Matthew 5:28, which we're probably all familiar with this one. Every man should have this one memorized, or at least the concept memorized. Jesus said, but I say unto you, that whosoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. So the sin has actually been committed before it's physically acted on, right? It can be done in the heart. And though men can't see what's going on in the heart, but God sees what goes on in the heart. So God knows when adultery has been committed. And if, like, this is actually possible. Like, if, let's say somebody was exposed and caught that they had been viewing pornography, and clearly it'd be pretty hard to view pornography without lusting in your heart after this person. So even though they hadn't technically committed adultery, like physically yet, but if you find that, then you have really proof of what's going on in that person's heart. Unless they're like, well, I'm just doing it for to admire the beauty and the form of these people or something, which is, probably BS. But so anyway, whenever something is proven, or for instance, if a guy finds out that his wife has been carrying on an online conversation with some other man, or vice versa, you can say, okay, the adultery was going on in the heart, clearly if the communication was of that nature, even though they never touched each other. So you could be guilty of adultery and even put out of the church for adultery if it could be exposed what was going on in here. Or if some guy just got up in front of the church and just says, I just got something I want to say, I feel really bad, I've been lusting after another woman in my heart. Well, dummy, you just admitted to adultery, in front of everybody. So anyway, be careful what you say. Job 31 and verse 1. I wasn't present for this, but I heard a story that happened in another church where somebody was, I'm assuming it was a church member, not somebody confessing for baptism or something, but they were addressing the congregation and feeling bad about something and just kind of wanted to get it off their chest. And the pastor's like, whoa, stop, because you're about ready to get excluded here because you're just admitting to some excludable offense to everybody, and it's publicly known. Job 31 and verse 1. Job says, I made a covenant with mine eyes. Why then should I think upon a maid? So the covenant of marriage is made ultimately with the eyes, that you will not look to another as the object of your romantic sexual love. That's why I think it was Abimelech told Sarah, Abraham's wife, that Abraham was to her a covering of the eyes. Because Abraham said it's my sister, and then she ended up going in and didn't end up becoming the man's wife because God restrained him. But he reproved Sarah and said, Abraham's a covering of your eyes, so you shouldn't be looking at anybody else. And same thing was true with a man. And then in 2 Peter 2 and verse 14, Peter talks about wicked people, reprobates, people that are not saved, in other words. And this whole chapter is devoted to those people. And in verse 14, here's one of their characteristics. Having eyes full of adultery, that cannot cease from sin, beguiling unstable souls, and heart have they exercised with covetous practices, cursed children. So it's interesting there. They have eyes full of adultery and a heart that exercise covetous practices, lusts of the heart. So that kind of goes together with eyes full of adultery. But this just shows you, once again, third witness, that adultery can be committed in the heart just by looking. Doesn't have to be physical. So men must stop themselves from having a strong, excessive, or inordinate desire for a woman's beauty other than their wife's, because that's the definition of lust. Strong, excessive, inordinate desire. Now you can have that desire towards your wife, and you should, but not towards another woman. That's where the trouble comes. And I learned this from the guy that had a lot to do with my conversion years ago. I remember he said it was a saying that's similar to this. The line between admiring beauty and lusting after it is very thin, and it only takes about 2 seconds to cross. Because he said, what's the difference? I think I said, well, and I was just kind of playing devil's advocate, like, well, what if somebody was looking at nude pictures of people and they were just doing it just to admire the beauty of the human body that God has created or something? And he said, do you know what the difference is between admiring beauty and lust? I said, no. And he said, about 2 seconds. And there's a lot of truth to that, you could look at a beautiful woman or a beautiful man, for that matter, a handsome man or something, and admire the person's beauty, and then it just takes just a second, all of a sudden your mind goes somewhere where it shouldn't go. So just something to be careful of. But there is nothing wrong with admiring beauty. And I can even admire a handsome man. My wife asked me the other day, who do you think the most handsome man you've ever seen is? I said, George Clooney. And I think he's a really handsome man. So you can admire beauty without lusting after somebody, but you just got to be careful with that. So the old foolish saying, you can look but you can't touch, is as wicked as hell. Right? That is just one of the most irritating, obnoxious, atrocious sayings that I've ever heard, and I really hate it. You cannot look or touch somebody that you're not married to. And then the second part of the verse. Neither let her take thee with her eyelids. So women are the weaker vessel, we're told in 1 Peter 3 and verse 7. 1 Peter 3 and verse 7. I'm going to make a point off of this, obviously. Likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as unto the weaker vessel, as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers be not hindered. So the wife is the weaker vessel, obviously physically weaker. Most women certainly are than men, but women yet have great power over men. And here's the interesting thing that we're going to see here as we get into this. A woman can use her eyelid. Now, I can't think of probably a less powerful muscle in your body than your eyelid. Can you? I can't think. Your eyelid doesn't have much. Grab a hold of your eyelashes and then try to blink. It's pretty hard to overpower your fingers, right? I mean, your eyelids don't have hardly any strength in them. But yet a woman with her eyelids can take a man. That's amazing. You think about that. That's really something. But we'll get into that in just a second. But just think about this. 3 examples here. Adam was a sinless man. So the most righteous man that ever lived until Jesus Christ came along. And yet his wife took him down, brought him down, right? Genesis 3:6. She gave to her husband and he did eat. And then Solomon was an exceeding wise man, wisest man that ever lived, except Jesus said, a greater than Solomon is here. So except for Jesus Christ, Solomon was the wisest man that ever lived. And guess what? His outlandish wives caused him to sin. They brought him down. And we read about that in Nehemiah 13 and verse 26. I've read that to you several times. And then Samson, the strongest, well, I don't know if he's the strongest man, but he was a very, very strong man. Obviously, the things that Samson could do were superhuman, basically. And yet, his wife Delilah brought him down, right? She kept getting on him and nagging him and appealing to, if you lovest me, if you really love me, you'd tell me the secret or whatever. You remember the story. And she brought him down. So here we have an extremely righteous man, an extremely physically strong man, and an extremely intelligent man, all three brought down by a woman. So that's just interesting to think about the power that women have over men. All a woman has to do is look at a man in a certain way or move her eyelids in a certain way in order to take him. And that is true. It's amazing. It really is. The word take means to seize, grasp, capture, catch, and related senses, in literal and physical sense. It is to lay hold upon, get into one's hands by force or artifice. Is that artifice or artifice?
Artifice.
Artifice. Okay. To seize, capture, especially in war, to make prisoner, hence to get into one's power, to win by conquest a fort, town, country. Also to apprehend a person charged with an offense. To arrest, to seize property by legal process, as by distraint. To catch, capture, a wild beast, bird, fish, etc. Also of an animal, to seize or catch, prey. To catch the fancy of, or to catch the fancy or affection of, to excite a liking in, to captivate, delight, charm, to fetch. So when you get the whole way down to number 10 there, then you start to get to the particular definition here that would be used in context. But when you take something, you take it by force. You capture it, grasp it, grab it, pull it to yourself. And literally, a woman could capture, grab, and take a man with her little eyelids that was the biggest bodybuilder the world's ever seen. It's amazing. Talking about the wild beast there, to catch or capture, wild beast, fish, bird, animal thing. I just watched a video the other day. This poor little gazelle got caught by a crocodile and pulled into this pond. And the crocodile just had a hold of one of her legs. And the gazelle kept trying to get out. And the crocodile wasn't really like rolling her or anything, but he just had a hold of her. And she kept trying to get away, and she couldn't get away. Kept trying to get away. And eventually she finally gets away and climbs up out of there, and then just kind of starts walking away like nothing. And this leopard comes out of the bush and bam, it kills her.
Oh my goodness.
It was
doomed.
I know. And she wasn't paying a bit of attention. She just like, whew, got away from him. And then just yeah, nature's cruel. Wow. So the strange woman doesn't take a man by physical force, but by lustful attraction, by her flattering speech, and her alluring look. Those are usually the two ways that she takes him. Proverbs 7 and verse 21, first of all. Proverbs 7, verse 21. Says, with her much fair speech she caused him to yield. With the flattering of her lips she forced him. Once again, your lips are not very strong, right? Not much muscle in your lips, but all you got to do is move them in the right way and make the air pass over them in the right way with some help of your vocal cords and your tongue. And you just say a few words, and you have a lot of power over a man. And then also by the alluring look. Proverbs 7 and verse 10 says, and behold, there met him a woman with the attire of an harlot and subtle of heart. So that's why it's so important for women to understand that to wear clothes that reveal cleavage or thighs or just really tight clothing, that is very provocative to men, and that a woman can easily take a man just by that clothing, combined with flattering words, and the look in her eye. I mean, those three things right there could bring down any man that is not on his guard, and God is not given grace to withstand it. So a woman only needs her eyes to ravish a man. Song of Solomon 4 and verse 9. This is talking about Solomon's wife, but the same power is there present, whether it's used for good or for evil. Song of Solomon 4 and verse 9 says, Thou, Solomon, speaking to his wife, Thou hast ravished my heart, my sister, my spouse. Thou hast ravished my heart with one of thine eyes, with one chain of thy neck. So typically, ravish basically means like to carry away by force, like it's almost rape. And so when men ravish women, like it talks about in war when women were ravished and things like that, it's a totally different thing, and that's done by physical force. But women can ravish men just by looks, basically. And then Song of Solomon 6 and verse 5 says, Turn away thine eyes from me, for they have overcome me. See the power that the woman's eyes has over the man? Thy hair is as a flock of goats that appear from Gilead. So there's a lot of power in the eyes. There's an old saying that the eye is the window of the soul. And I think there's a lot of truth in that saying. You can probably learn more about a person or figure out what's going on in their head by their eyes than anything else. I mean, the whole face, of course, but the eyes especially. The eyes tell so much to people that pay attention and can, some people are just clueless and they don't pick up on any cues, but to people that have a little bit of acumen there and can read people, the eyes say a lot. The look of the eyes can reveal lust or love, either one. Solomon's wife was taking him, and that was true, biblical marital love. But the strange woman's eyes can take a man through lust. So when a woman who's not a man's wife looks at him with alluring eyes and flattering eyelids, he should run. Don't even try to resist that one. And of course, it just makes a lot of men feel so good and feel so special and important that some woman would flatter him either with her eyelids or with her speech or something, that a lot of times he doesn't want to run because he's just liking this, right? Even if he's not going to go and commit adultery, he likes feeling special. But you want to run right away. Stay away from a woman like that. Proverbs 4:14 through 15. Enter not into the path of the wicked, and go not in the way of evil men. Avoid it, pass not by it, turn from it, and pass away. And that would go for the way of evil women as well. Now the adulteress hunts for the precious life, just like a hunter hunts an animal to take it. So hunting and taking go hand in hand. We'll talk about hunting in the next verse in Proverbs 6:26. It says, For by means of a whorish woman a man is brought to a piece of bread, and the adulteress will hunt for the precious life. And you hunt in order to take. Let me just show you a couple of verses here. First of all, 1 Samuel 24 and verse 11. 1 Samuel 24. Verse 11. This is David speaking to Saul, his father-in-law. It says, Moreover, my father, see the skirt of thy robe in my hand. That's after he'd cut it off. For in that I cut off the skirt of thy robe, and killed thee not, know thou and see that there is neither evil nor transgression in mine hand, and I have not sinned against thee. Yet thou huntest my soul to take it. Hunt to take. She takes him with her eyelids. She hunts for him and then takes him with the eyelids. And let me give you one more. Proverbs 12 and verse 27. The slothful man roasteth not that which he took, past tense of take, which he took in hunting. So you go hunting to take an animal. The strange woman goes hunting to take a man. She hunts on the street corner. We hunt out in the woods, right? But you go wherever the prey are, and the prey are on the street corners, right? That's where you go. Now the godly man will escape from her, but the sinner shall be taken by her. Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 26. Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 26. Solomon said, I find more bitter than death a woman whose heart is snares and nets, and her hands as bands. Whoso pleaseth God shall escape from her, but the sinner shall be taken by her. So her heart is snares and nets. She takes the man, right? I mean, conceived in her heart is this plan to take him. There are snares and nets in that heart. And her